Hey there, Dr. Anna Maria Helt here, herbalist and microbiologist, here with Monday's Mushroom, episode 21. I swear I've done this one already. I thought that I've done one on Shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, otherwise known as Inky Cap, and I really, just for the life of me, can't find the video, so here it is. I know I talked about a different kind of Inky Cap that was growing in the greenhouse several months ago, but today I'm focusing on something different. And if I'm really going batty, and I already did a video on this at some point, well, here it goes again. So the focus today will be on two of the so-called Inky Cap mushrooms. The first will be Coprinus comatus, otherwise known as shaggy mane or lawyer's wig. And then at the end, I'll just quickly talk about the alcohol Inky Cap, Coprinopsis atramentarius. So here goes. Starting with Coprinus comatus. Comatus means hairy or shaggy, and when you look at the cap on this mushroom, you can see maybe where that comes from. So it's one of its common names beyond Inky Cap is shaggy mane, and also lawyer's wig, and that's because of the little curls here that resemble those old-fashioned wigs that lawyers used to use back in the day. So here's a little stubby mushroom here, a little stubby shaggy mane that is not fully mature yet. So the shape of this mushroom can change dramatically. So this mushroom comes out here in the southern Rockies, generally in cooler weather, but really, so during cooler weather, so you have a good rain or something like that, it'll be out anywhere from June into the fall, showing up in yards, in dung piles, in parks, along roadsides and such, also at high elevations. So I tend to see this right alongside forest roads, but also in town, like in the grass, for instance, right next to a parking lot. So this is a saprophytic mushroom, which means that it lives on dead and decaying organic matter. It grows out of the ground. And the cap starts out kind of cylindrical shaped. Here on the left is a cross section of a cap, so you can actually see the gills, the side of the gill here, or the side of a couple gills here actually. And then as it grows and grows and grows and finally goes even beyond full maturity and is dying back, it opens up like an umbrella and it actually starts to break down. Now, before I get to that breakdown, the stalks are hollow. So again, in this cross section here, you can see that hollow stalk there. They are white to start out with, but they will get dirty with the dark colored spores that this mushroom produces. The gills will start out white, and you can see that on the upper half of this cross section, the white gills, they start to turn black as the mushroom matures, as it is producing spores. And why this mushroom and others that are related to it are called Inky Caps is because the caps will turn to black goo. You can maybe see how shiny and gooey this is. This is called deliquescence. And so it basically liquefies and turns to goo. And I actually took these two mushrooms home with me, and they were, the tops at least, were almost mush by the time I got back to my home. So Inky Caps. Here is a cluster of them growing alongside a roadside, a forest road. This was at fairly high elevation, 10,300 feet, I think it was, if I remember correctly. One thing to be aware of if you do decide you want to harvest this mushroom is to make sure you are not accidentally picking chlorophyllum, false parasol mushroom or false shaggy parasol mushroom. The shape is a little bit different with Coprinus on the left here and chlorophyllum on the right. This one on the right is toxic. It's a nasty gastrointestinal toxic mushroom, and it is shaggy on top as well. So if somebody's not paying attention and looking in a lawn, in a park, and seeing these mushrooms grow, you could accidentally pick chlorophyllum. Now, chlorophyllum does not have black gills. When it's mature, it will have kind of dingy green gills and a ring around the stalk and green spores. Coprinus, the one on the left here, that is edible. will, as I said, the gills will start out white and then they will turn black and then they will turn to goo. And they have dark, dark spores, black spores. So don't make this mistake. Shaggy manes, or what's being called Coprinus comatus, is found around the world, multiple parts of the world. And that may change as geneticists take a look at the DNA of the mushrooms, but for now, it's considered to be a fairly cosmopolitan fungus, and it's eaten around the world as well, here in North America, over in multiple parts of Asia and Europe, wherever it grows. Now, if you're going to eat shaggy mane, you want to eat the young ones. And after looking at the picture of one of the shaggy manes deliquescing or turning into black goo, you can maybe understand why you want to eat younger ones and not older ones. The other issue here is they don't store well. So if you're going to eat these mushrooms, you want to basically cook them pretty shortly after coming home. I actually once picked some and then I thought, oh, they'll be fine in the fridge overnight until tomorrow when I go to cook them. Nope. I opened the fridge, looked in the bowl with the wet paper towel over the mushrooms, how I normally store my mushrooms in the fridge, and I had a bowl of basically black goo with some remaining mushroom chunks in it. So cook it right away. I have, however, seen reference to people using that black goo in their pasta dough. So maybe a squid ink pasta without the squid. So something I haven't experimented with, but just throwing that out there for you. Now, much like this mushroom is eaten around the world, it's also used medicinally around the world. So some traditional uses, just some examples here. Multiple cultures on the Indian subcontinent use this mushroom medicinally. So for instance, further north, actually up in Kashmir, a decoction or strong tea of the young mushrooms, the young fruiting bodies, or else the stalks, are used for respiratory issues as well as for diabetes, so blood sugar lowering qualities. And topically, in various parts of India, the mushroom is used for skin first aid. So the gills themselves and their black spores are applied to things like sores and wounds and burns and such with a bandage on top to speed up healing. So infections, things like that. Now, moving over to traditional Chinese medicine, this mushroom has been used to support digestion, to deal with excess bleeding, to deal with hemorrhoids, and so some traditional usage there. If we look at lab studies of this mushroom, by lab studies, I don't mean clinical trials, I mean stuff done by people in white coats and labs. There are some interesting data looking at prostate cancer cells. Now, these are cells in a dish. Whether that, as I always say, whether that means a damn thing when we're talking about the prostate cancer in a person, who knows? But this is where research starts, in a dish. So in prostate cancer, the cancer can proliferate or grow in response to an aggressive androgen known as dihydrotestosterone, or DHT. So that DHT binds to androgen receptors on the surface of the prostate cancer cells and then triggers a reaction further in the cell that causes that cell to divide. And so this is looking at cells in a dish, like I said, but it was found with this mushroom that the androgen receptor DHT interaction was blocked by mushroom extracts, by the extract of this particular mushroom. So it prevented the ability of this aggressive form of testosterone, dihydrotestosterone. It prevented its ability to bind to the prostate cancer cells in a dish and trigger them to grow and proliferate. The other thing it did in these cell culture models, the mushroom extracts, was to actually reduce the level of that androgen. I wish my focus would stop changing. It would reduce the level of that androgen receptor on the surface of the cell. So the receptor was downregulated and not found on the surface of the cell to the same level. So another way that it could block the androgen signaling that makes these cells grow. Now again, whether this means anything in the real world is yet to be determined. Some other lab studies, these were done in rodents. Not that I am a fan of rodent studies, but extracts of this mushroom showed liver protection in rodent models. Now, generally how these experiments are done is either before, during, or after rodents are given some noxious chemical that pisses the liver off, usually causing free radical damage, oxidative stress, inflammation, and such. The mushroom is given to the rodents. And so again, the mushroom might be given ahead of time, during toxin administration, or even after. And in the case of this experiment, the mushrooms protected the rat livers from damage by noxious chemicals. So again, does this mean that the mushroom will protect our livers? Who knows, but can't hurt to eat it given the number of chemicals that we are now being exposed to as clean as you try to live. That didn't even exist, 100, 120 years ago. Now, blood sugar regulation is another area of interest being looked at in the lab. Now, you'll recall maybe, if you're still awake, that I said in parts of India this mushroom is actually used for support with diabetes. And so in lab studies in rodents, it was found to decrease blood sugar levels in rodents who had excess blood sugar levels, hyperglycemia. And so it was specifically a polysaccharide extract of the mushroom that did that. And in test tube studies, so no cells, no rodents at all, mushroom extracts were found to inhibit the activity of starch digestion enzymes. Again, this may or may not mean anything in the real world, but the idea is that if you can slow down the activity of starch digestion enzymes in the body, you slow down the release of glucose or sugar into the bloodstream, and it's a way to reduce blood sugar levels. So other experiments, again, lab-based studies show impacts on the immune system, antioxidant effects, antimicrobial effects, and this is shared with many, many other mushrooms that have been tested in the lab. The alcohol inky cap is Coprinopsis atramentaria. And if you look in older guidebooks, you'll see this called Coprinus atramentaria. And that they've since been separated into different genera. And that is the trend with mushrooms at this point. A lot of mushrooms in North America were named for European species, and genetics is finding that they are different species. And even beyond that, mushrooms that were considered in the same genus, maybe because of some macroscopic features, something about what they look like, or even some microscopic features, again, based on genetics and biochemistry, are being moved into a separate genre or different genuses. Genre is plural for genus. So here is a cluster of alcohol inky caps that were growing in the grass right alongside a parking lot. You can see maybe from this that the top of the cap is smoother. It's not shaggy as with the shaggy mane, one of the other inky caps. You can see from this as well the dark gills. So these are more mature fruiting bodies. The gills are already starting to turn black here. The distribution of this mushroom is pretty similar, at least here in the Southern Rockies, as with Coprinus comatus. So down in town here, we're at 6,500 feet, found in many other parts of the world, much lower down in elevation. But these guys here were actually found at about 9,000 feet up in the mountains. These are tucked in under some yarrow plants, so some little baby caps. And you can even better see here that the caps are smooth and not shaggy. They're kind of grayish, lightest gray to tannish color, a little kind of faintly stripy, to put it very scientifically. And so this also deliquiesces, just like Coprinus comatus. So here is one here where you're seeing its long white stalk. You can see I've got some dark spores on my finger. You can see the dark spores on the top of the stalk here. See how dark those gills are turning, and see the edges of that cap starting to break down and curl up. So this mushroom is in the process of deliquiescing, and I would not be able to get this one home from the mountains fast enough to be able to make a meal out of it before it turns to goo. So the alcohol inky cap is also used as food in the many places where it grows. But the reason, excuse me, the reason it's called the alcohol inky cap is because eating this mushroom in combination with having some alcohol can cause problems, an unpleasant reaction. And so what happens, or what the deal is here, is that this particular species, and actually some other species of mushroom in this kind of inky cap family, blocks a step in ethanol or alcohol metabolism in the liver. And so what happens with ethanol, which is the type of alcohol that we get in wine and beer and cocktails and such, it is metabolized in the liver in a couple of steps. So the first step changes ethanol into a compound called acetaldehyde. And then another step after that converts acetaldehyde into other metabolites. What happens is that second step is blocked and acetaldehyde it accumulates in the body. And what happens is things like nausea, tachycardia or rapid heart rate, which can cause anxiety, but low blood pressure at the same time. Dizziness is possible, and it can be pretty unpleasant. And for those of us who have anxiety attacks, really unpleasant. Now, generally, these symptoms are self-resolving. After about 6 hours of misery and panic, they'll go away. And I kind of laugh, but it really is not pleasant. Now, so it's not that this mushroom's not edible, you just cannot have it together with alcohol. And I mean, you can't have it 30 minutes after you've had alcohol or 30 minutes before you've had alcohol. You can't even really have it within 3 days of drinking alcohol because that can still cause problems. To be honest, I won't even eat regular Shaggy mane. I shouldn't call it regular, just plain old Shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, with alcohol, even though it's been found not to contain coprine. I just don't want to touch it. I don't want to risk having a weird reaction. So I don't even eat Shaggy mane or Coprinus comatus and have a drink within a few days of it just because I'm paranoid. So coprine, I don't know if I even mentioned it, it is the toxin in the alcohol inky cap. It's an alkaloid that blocks that step in the metabolism of alcohol and acetaldehyde. So coming to the traditional usage of this mushroom, though, the alcohol inky cap. In traditional Chinese medicine, it is used to support healthy digestion. It is used to reduce a pathogenic factor known as phlegm, phlegm, P-H-L-E-G-M, with the P capitalized. So we know we're talking about phlegm from the Chinese perspective. It's not identical to what we think of as phlegm from a Western perspective. There's a little bit of overlap, but not entirely. Also, topically, the alcohol inky cap is used for sores. So similar to how Shaggy mane is used topically for sores. In Kashmir, the alcohol inky cap is used for kidney problems and for pus in the urine, which is indicative of urinary tract infection, and also for gallstones. So there you go, a couple of the inky caps out there. There are actually many more, including those that have medicinal uses, but don't extrapolate what I've told you about these two particular species to those other species. You want to learn about those independently. Thank you for watching. If you have any questions or any experience with either of these mushrooms, feel free to share it in the comments. I look at all of them. Take care, y'all, and be well.